about, when we talk about the age of the universe, from a biblical point of view, the biblical year is 57, 7. Now you're going to see a different number here because some of these slides are a few years old. That doesn't relate, probably everyone realizes, but I'll say anyway, that doesn't relate to the creation of the universe, right? Rosh Hashanah, Rosh, head, ha, the Shana, the head of the year, the biblical New Year commemorates what major event in the history of the universe? The creation of Adam, yeah. Remember, Adam was not necessarily a man, probably a man and a woman, because we see in chapter 5 of Genesis, God created them, male and female, and called their name Adam. It's worth reading. Genesis chapter 5, about verse 2 or 3. God created them, male and female, and called their name Adam. Adam wasn't a man. Then Adam, man, Mr. Adam, being the men always macho, pushing the women around, laying Mrs. Adam, Isha, Isha, like man, woman. Ish is the word for man, Isha is the word for human. It's almost the same, like man and woman. It's the same also. So it's Adam that gives Mrs. Adam a different name. So so the age of the universe that we find, 5779, dates back to Adam and Eve. It does not date back to the creation of the universe. And this just talks about male and female. He created them. There it is. There's a sense, but chapter 5 is more explicit, where he says, and he called their name Adam. God created them, male and female, and called their name Adam. This just talks a bit about, we're not going to get into the text, we can do it later. The creation of the Adam relates to the creation of the soul of life, the neshama of life, and the nefesh chaya. And the Onkelos translation, which goes back about 1900 years, is that with the neshama, the soul of the Hebrew name for the soul of humans is neshama, and that became, the translation is to ruach mamalala, a speaking spirit. The nature, what makes us different is not speech, it's spiritual speech. If we were speaking animals, Onkelos would have written chaya mamalala, speaking animals. We are not speaking animals. We are speaking spirits, and this is exactly what Jardine says perfectly, so I would have said it also, but he beat me to it by about 80, 60 years. We're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And the way that I said it at the National Prayer Breakfast is as follows, and it's literally true. The you see in the mirror is not the you that makes you you. Don't confuse yourself with what you see in the mirror. We are not physical beings. We are spiritual beings, and every discovery that makes your iPhone work comes closer and closer to make that the case. The spirituality is what it centers on. And as Heisenberg, Schroeder, I'm Schroeder, we dropped the R. Schroeder, Erwin Schroeder, one of the 3 or 4 Nobel laureates that developed the physics that lets your iPhone work, says that we don't belong to this world. The reason that we think we are in this physical world is because our bodies are in the physical world, but we're not part of it. And that's what you hear constantly from out-of-body experiences, people with near-death experiences, and now the part of the brain that induces, that contacts this you that's not you, has now been discovered. That we have an antenna in the brain, actually, that picks, like we have an antenna in the brain that picks up light, picks up sound, picks up taste. We have an antenna in the brain that picks up this metaphysical that is you. Olaf Blank, the neurologist, discovered it about 5 or 6 years ago. Anyway, spiritual beings. Okay, so we have Adam and Eve for the beginning of the calendar. And the change is the neshama. Now, in making this slide, we put the neshama into the woman. I hope that men have it also, although when I relate to my relationship, what you do see is, first came the animals, then came man, and then came woman. So, we do see it. But it is interesting to remember, and, I said it today in the school, we were giving school for high school. Ben knows where it was. I don't know where it was. Yeah, we wanted to do it here, but it didn't work out. You should remember that every divine input into the world is feminine. There are no masculine and divine inputs into the world. They're all feminine. Hebrew carries femininity, separates, right? English doesn't, because he and her and him, after that, it's gone. Them is already, third person is already neutered, right? But Hebrew doesn't. Neshama is feminine, the soul of human life. But all humans have the animal soul called nefesh. Nefesh is feminine, even though it has a masculine in it. So nefesh, the soul of animals, is feminine. Neshama, the soul of humans, is feminine. What's the indwelling of God? Shekhinah is feminine, which is the major aspect that we experience, because that's the indwelling of God. And then there, in Proverbs number 9, the world is created with Chachma Tevuna Dat. It's the origin of the word Chabad. Chachma Tevuna Dat, all are feminine. All the inputs are feminine. I always say, if I had learned this, thank God we're married way over 40 years, but if I had learned this about 40 years ago, life for the first 20 years in our family would have been a lot smoother. So the women in the audience, every time you have a dispute, bring that up, they will be our feminine. That's a reality. I mean, it's almost embarrassing. I mean, I'm not against men, but if I had a choice. Anyway, if the neshama is such a big deal, if the neshama is such a big deal, if the soul of human life is such a big deal, and it is a big deal, it's a separation between animals before us and humans. If it's such a big deal, so why didn't it make an impact on the world? We claim that sometime less than 6,000 years, the number is 5779, Rabbi Schwab has a big essay that it might be off by a couple of hundred years, but either way, it's less than 6,000 years. The neshama comes into the world and in theory changes it. So why wasn't there a change in the world? And it just turns out there was a change. When I came upon this in the British Museum, it sounds corny and silly, but I almost fell on the floor and wept. The British Museum gives a date. Now not the Science Museum in London, the most important museum in the world for Mesopotamia. Nothing comes close to the British Museum. None of the ones that are in Egypt, whatever. This is it. If you want to understand the development of life, of human life in the Middle East, in Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, in other words. We go, my wife is Barbara Sofer. We're married, but Sofer was writer, and she was a writer before we were going to change her name for a neutral name in between. So she's Sofer after, but our name is really Sofer Schroeder. So Barbara writes an article every 2 weeks. I urge you, she's a phenomenal writer, the Jerusalem Post, called The Human Spirit. But we're giving lectures back to back, which we do a lot. And in London, at the afternoon off, we go to the British Museum, and we see this plaque on the wall, the earliest cities. And it gives a date. The British Museum dates a change in civilization of 5,000, they don't write BCE, I put the BCE in there. 5,500 years ago, civilization changed. Sound familiar? 5,500 years ago? The neshama comes into the world about 57 years, a few hundred years it changes, it turns out, and the world changes, and the marker is the first large cities. The first large cities are dated to be just a few hundred years after the neshama comes into the world. The neshama spreads, and finally got enough people with the neshama to make a city. Before the neshama, you couldn't have a city. Because before the neshama, if you didn't look like me, smell like me, and talk like me, I had you for dinner, literally. It was an animal world in which one animal ate the other animal. The animals may have been human, but Maimonides talks about in the Guide for the Flex, these beings existed of the same shape and same intelligence, but they weren't humans. They lacked the neshama. What makes you a human isn't what you see in the mirror. It's your neshama, your soul. Farming goes back 10,000 years, so I say literally, I don't deserve it. My wife may buy it. Thanks. The curator is there of this entire wing, not a room, it's a wing in the museum. And I'm asking about this plaque on the wall, which tells you what you're seeing with all these artifacts in the back. I said, what caused it? What was how did it happen? Was it a population explosion that made the first cities? He said, no, that goes back 10,000 years. Farming is invented 10,000 years ago. These beings these Homo sapiens sapiens had, as Maimonides points out, I don't know how Maimonides knew it. They get it from the text, you have to refer into it. Had the same intelligence, same shape as humans, but they weren't humans. They invented farming 10,000 years ago. Once you're farming, two things happen. First of all, wars begin because now you own land. And I asked the curator, well, what about cities? The Tower of Jericho goes back 10,000 years. He said, yeah, but don't confuse the Tower of Jericho with the city of Jericho. It's the same oasis. But that was a marker. This is my land, my farmland. Stay off my land. In other words, there are markers now. Land suddenly became private as opposed to hunter-gatherers. So why should farming, the invention of farming 10,000 years ago, change the population explosion? Because before farming, it was hunter-gathering. You had to follow the herd. How many kids can you carry? So the families were limited in size. But once you have farming, you're sedentary. What happens is the skeletons get smaller because now it's less meat in the diet. Now becomes vegetable plus meat. Before it was meat plus vegetable. So you have bigger skeleton. But there are many more of them. That's why we have so many. The people are burying, these beings are burying the dead. Now, which means something interesting. When the British Museum says that people go back 90,000 years, when the British, or the anthropology textbook said that people go back 90,000 years, that 50,000 years ago these people were inventing tools. By 10,000 years ago, they were inventing farming, and the farming took a few thousand years to spread. It starts 10,000 years ago, exactly where Israel and Syria touch. By 8,000 years ago, it was already into Europe because it spreads gradually over time. Populations increased, but that wasn't what was making the first large cities. There was a change. So in the British Museum and these anthropology textbooks tell you that people go back 90,000 years. They are completely correct by their definition of a person. Make it clear, the founder of ancient Torah, this brilliant human being, Noah Weinberg, said, in any discussion, the first thing you have to do is define your terms. The British Museum, your anthropology textbook, your kids and grandchildren are going to be studying in school. Define a person as a being that looks like you or looks like me, has your brains and my brains. And they go back 90,000 years. The Bible defines a person. Theology defines a person almost exactly the same. Looks like you, looks like me, has your brains and my brains, and has a neshama. The neshama changed the world. If you can't define the terms, you can't have a discussion. So when you find these people saying, when you find these textbooks saying people go back to this, then you'll realize their definition is not the biblical definition. The neshama changed the world, and the British science gives it a date, which matches exactly what the Torah said 3,500 years ago. After a while, you can begin to believe these things overlap time and again, that you have arguments with I think they call them secular, because maybe they really are not really secular people, but it becomes more and more difficult to wiggle around and argue against the Bible having information that couldn't have been known by persons 3,500 years ago. And remember that 35 BCE is 5,500 years ago. Because of the 2,000 years they get it back to there. Okay, so we have two calendars now. Now we talk about the age of the universe. And it goes with the neshama, Adam and Eve here. And we have, it should be 57, 79 years. It's a few years old, and I'm not clever enough to know how to change this. And as Ben points out, it's an image, so to change it, to change the whole thing. So we're not going to change it. That's what we're stuck with. In 10 years, if you invite it back, it'll still say 57, 71. Okay? So, we have Adam and Eve here. We have the time to get up till today. Science says 14 billion years. Torah says 6 days, but it's even worse. It's not even 6 days. It's 5.5 days. The Talmud tells us explicitly that Adam was created halfway through the 6th day. And you wouldn't even need the Talmud for that. If you look at the flow in Genesis chapter 1, you get to day 6, where Adam is first mentioned, and you count the number of sentences devoted to day number 6. Adam is spot on halfway through. So that may be the origin of the Talmudic logic. But Adam is created halfway through the 6th day. So the calendar leading up to Rosh Hashanah from the creation isn't 6 days. It's 5.5 days. At the creation of the neshama, the perspective of time, the description of time changes. Up to Adam, evening and morning, day 1, evening and morning, a second day, this evening and morning stuff, which is not the best of translations, but that's what the English usually says, is unique to the 6 days of Genesis. The description of time in Genesis chapter 1 is unique. Nowhere else in the entire Tanakh, the entire Hebrew Bible, is the passage of time discussed this way. Evening, morning, this happened, and evening, morning, that. So we have a unique description of time, and we have a creation that Torah says is a bit less than 6,000 years ago, and science says is about 14 billion years ago, and you should understand I've given this talk in Chabad literally, not figuratively, literally around the world. So the first thing you have to get out of your head is that the days were long periods of time. Can I see a show of hands, please? It's good to stretch anyway, especially it's 9 o'clock almost. Let's just stretch your hands. Can I see a good, strong show of hands? Wait, he's not quite yet. A good show of hands of how many have ever heard, if you don't believe it, have you ever heard the argument, oh, the days of Genesis weren't really days, they were long periods of time. Anyone ever heard that? Everyone who's still awake actually has heard this. The simple fact is we always hear that garbage. All of Chazal, with no exception, tell us that the days were 24 hours each. Now that's interesting because you know what? The Torah uses the word yom, which means day. The Torah could have said kufa, ona, there's 2 words right off the bat. They're biblical words for general periods of time. But the Torah doesn't say there was the kufa, the first one, tukavo, ona. It says no, day. And all of ancient, but these are the 2 major commentators. Rashi, if any people, I know sometimes persons are not familiar with, so Rashi is about the year 1090, it was about the year 1090, the major commentator from a logic point of view on the meaning of the words. It's the easiest Rashi in the entire text, Kaf Dalet She'od. Kaf Dalet means 24 hours, 24 hours. Nachmanides, with an N, Nachmanides, the major Kabbalistic commentary on the words of the Torah, not only says that the 24 hours each, but he says, K'mo sheshet yemei avodah, like the 6 days of our work week. So you can't even say the hours long, like we're long periods. The simple fact is, the days of Genesis were 24 hours each. Like it or not, there's no wiggle room in the commentary, 0. But on the other hand, Torah science says 14 billion years. So that's a bit of a problem, maybe. But it isn't a bit of a problem, because Nachmanides explains exactly how this can be. How a person, Nachmanides about 800 or 900 years ago, he realized, and he says none of it is his idea, he's into Kabbalah. It's not mysticism, Kabbalah, it's logic. All of Kabbalah, that's real Kabbalah, is Torah-based. It's totally logic, and it's sure. I don't really wish I had figured it out myself, because then I would say I'm bending the Bible. Nachmanides takes you by the nose and leads you to the understanding of how the universe can be young and old simultaneously, with bending neither the Bible nor the science. And it's totally within the text. At the end of each day of Genesis, chapter 1, the day is numbered. It's the Erev and Boker thing, the evening and the morning. Okay, it really means chaos and order, but we'll let that go. Anyway. Evening and morning, day 1 day, Yom Ahad. Next day, jump down a few lines, evening, morning. 2nd day, jump down, evening, morning. 3rd day, 4th day, 5th day, the 6th day. Nachmanides asks the question, why the change in the form? It says 2nd day, 3rd day, 4th day, 5th day, the 6th day. Give me a 1st day. But the text doesn't say a 1st day. The text says day 1. And that's the whole answer for the entire problem of the age of the universe. The text says day 1, we are told. The text says day 1, and not a 1st day, because the Torah did not write a 1st day on the 1st day. There's evening, morning, a 1st day, because the only time you can write 1st is when it's relative to a 2nd day. And the world wars make that very clear, don't they? During the First World War, who called the First World War the First World War? No, not true. The pessimists called it the First World War. Everyone else, and they have to be right, everyone else called it the Great War, the Big War, the War to End the War. Then came the next war, and suddenly the Great War became the First World War. I give my personal experience, which is very deep and proud, but also painful. I fought in the First Lebanese War. None of us including my 4 buddies that didn't come back from the First Lebanese War, said, gee, we're fighting in the First Lebanese War. Now, why we were fighting in the First Lebanese War, why didn't we say we were fighting in the First Lebanese War? Why?
Because you didn't know there would be a second war.
Because there wasn't yet a second war, yeah. So now I have to say I fought in the First Lebanese War, because there was a second Lebanese war. The Torahites won because there was not yet a second data. Now I guarantee you Nachmanides knew Rashi, one day, one God, etc. But not, the Kabbalah is the Tachlis, not the philosophy. The Tachlis, how the world is put together. The Torahites write day 1 and not a first day because there wasn't a second day. Really? That's very interesting. Because, again, why not a second day? There hadn't been a second, why not a first day? What's happened to the second day? Because, see, Nachmanides had actually read the Bible a few times, and he realized the Torah wasn't given to Adam. The Torah gets to Moses on Sinai. So by the time you get to Moses on Sinai, who gets the Torah, well, you have over 2,000 years, 2,448 years, times 365 days a year, comes out to be 893,000 days. By the time you get the Torah being given on Sinai, there've been almost 900,000 second days. And here's the phenomenal insight. If the view of the Torah for the 6 days of Genesis, from Sinai looking back, had there already been a second day? Yeah, about 900,000 second days. Well, it was an end, not the Ramban. Did I say Maimonides?
Asks this question.
The Ramban.
Asks this question.
Here, the Nachmanides were the Nachmanides.
He explained before, I saw, he explained this idea that it wasn't yet a second.
Exactly. There wasn't yet a second day. So the Torah is not seeing time from Sinai. The Torah is seeing time from the beginning, looking forward. That's the whole key. Why that should have interested anyone, almost 1,000 years Nachmanides, or the author as a work of the Bible thousands of years ago, unless you knew something about the universe, and that is that the universe is expanding. The Torah sees time from the beginning looking forward. It is the one mistake that Isaac Newton made in his famous Principia Mathematica that described classical mechanics. Quantum physics is the state, relativistic physics, and then quantum physics moves beyond that. But Newton wrote for classical physics, like, why does this fall down, like the famous apple falling off the tree, the classical physics that we see in the world in our face. The one mistake he made, he said, time stands pristine, unaffected by events. It's gorgeous, but wrong. Time does not stand pristine. It's part of the nitty-gritty. And how you view an event in an expanding universe determines totally your perception of that event and also the duration of that event. The Torah says day 1 because the Torah sees time before there was a second day, which is only from the first day looking forward. So what is the perception of time from the Torah? From the beginning, looking forward. We look back in time. We live out here. We live right here. This is us. This is that NASA diagram. Do we see this diagram yet? Maybe not, so I have to explain it. This is the diagram that comes from NASA, the National Space Authority. And I just want to see where I came. Don't I show the actual diagram anymore? I was disappointed. I cut some of these things in the wrong way. Okay, no, forget it. Okay, later we'll get to the whole diagram. So, what's the perception of time in the Bible? We look back, and this is a time diagram. Every line is 1 billion years, and we measure that from us looking back here. The satellite was what mapped this diagram. The original has words on it. I must have erased it somehow. It's my fault entirely. But we look back, and we measure the age to be 14 billion years. How do we do that? We have big telescopes, and we get data from outer space. The light coming to us through space has to travel through space. But you notice the universe, that's creation, that's us here. That's the beginning of the universe, that's us here. The universe is expanding. So if a galaxy is very far away, the light doesn't come to us immediately, it has to go through space. Space is expanding. So we measure the wavelength of the light and measure how much it is stretched out. And by looking at that stretching, we can determine how far away that galaxy is and how much time it took for us to get to it. And there's a person whose name probably almost no one in this room knows. Everyone knows Hubble, the Hubble telescope, I presume. You should look up on the web Henrietta Leavitt. There would, with 2 T's, there would be no Hubble telescope if it were not for the work of Henrietta Leavitt. She's such a... Every measurement that he made and published is based on her work, and he put her up for a Nobel Prize. And she unfortunately died of cancer before she could get the prize. Otherwise you would have a Henrietta Leavitt telescope in the sky as well as a Hubble. But you look her up on some Herald. In any event, using those data, by looking at how much space is stretched, we calculate how old the universe is. That's how those data. Torah, we get it by adding up the calendar, which is interesting because the Torah didn't have to tell us the ages. Why does the Torah bother telling us that Adam and Eve are 130 years, Kip named Seth 105 years, chapter 5 and after the ages? I need to know those data? Apparently the Bible thinks so, otherwise it wouldn't have told us those data. So we add them up, we get a number less than 6,000 years. We look at science, at the stretch, we get 14 billion years. But day one tells us that, I thought there was a laser here. No. Okay. So, it's the wrong one. I don't know which way it is. Okay. The Torah says day one because we're seeing time from the Torah's point, looking forward from the beginning. We look back from here and we get that age by measuring the stretching of space. Now, why should that matter? It matters because when you view an event that is taking place somewhere in deep space, how you see that event is totally determined by how far away that event is from you. Let's see what these next. So we have a creation. It's Dak Ma'od Ein Bo Mamash, and we're going to get to this later. Then, the moment that there's physical time is actually time grabs the whole. Yifos Bosman, the bottom 3 Hebrew words there, but that will relate in a moment to what we're going to talk about. Let's just talk about this first. There's a galaxy out here. It's big, beautiful, and very far away. I mean, it's really far away. It takes billions of years for that light to reach us. It's a gorgeous galaxy because we don't see it lifetime. The light has to reach to us. So what's the phenomenon here? And it relates to the idea of seeing time forward or back. On the galaxy, a star explodes. I'm just going to have that light on. A star explodes. A supernova, big burst of light. It goes out in all directions. We just talked about the light coming this way. It's the same in all directions. Boom. A week later, another star explodes. 2 stars explode. Boom. And another. They're separated. Now, if this stood still, this would catch it in a week. But obviously, they're both moving through space. And they move through space, moving through space. We talk about the light coming towards a great big telescope, moving. But as they're moving through space, what's the universe doing? Static or? So what about this first space between the bursts? Expanding. Let's say the universe is now twice as big. So back here, the distance was 1 week. Now it's twice as big. The first burst hits the telescope. Wow, a supernova, what a beauty. But the second burst doesn't arrive a week later. The universe now is twice as big. So the second burst arrives, how much later?
2 weeks.
2 weeks, exactly 2 weeks later. My understanding of that event, by looking back in history, is 2 weeks. But I want to know what it was like on that galaxy. Well, I mean, the galaxy might be gone as many billions of years went by, but I can certainly make the calculation. I call up an astronomer, how far away is the galaxy, and now mathematically I go back in time. And as I go mathematically back in time, what's the universe doing? And the 2 weeks become 1 week. 2 perspectives at one time. We look back in history, we're 14 billion years. That's our measurement. They existed. Those billions of years existed. But how would they be perceived? From the Bible's point of view, we don't live in that point of view. We live in our land looking back in history. How would they appear from the Torah's point of view? So this is the key. We're seeing time from the beginning, but not quite the beginning, because Nachmanides writes, if he hadn't written this, it's just beautiful, that is, Dak Ma'od Ein Bo Mamash, having no substance, then time, Hazman Nivra, time was created, and then he writes, when matter forms, time grabs the whole. The English translation is not, it's very defective here. Yifos Bosman, Tofes, time grabs the whole, which interestingly is 100% literally true, because before you're getting matter, the substance, it's so thin it has no physics, no corporality, the stuff up there, Dak Ma'od Ein Bo Mamash, and then it comes and it gets mamash, it gets substance. Energy, you can't grab energy. But that's what this Dr. Orein Mamash is, something that has no substance, is energy, but it becomes mamash matter, and they said that's when the clock begins, when time grabs a hold. Now that passage of time, let's see where does this go? That passage of time from E equals M, Einstein told us how that could happen, but it was about 100,000th of a second. And it's literally true, in that 100th of a second between the line here of time coming to being and matter coming into being, time was passing, but nothing was measuring it. There's nothing stable. The first stable matter that forms wasn't neutrons. Neutrons are not stable, but protons are. And a proton, it's the stuff that's the heavy part of an atom that's inside. We don't, later if we have time just to show how we're really standing on empty space because of the structure of an atom. But the neutron, the proton is in the center, and the proton, the first stable stuff that defines matter, is a proton. If I say one proton, what's the element I'm talking about? And if I say two protons? Helium, 6 protons, carbon, 8, oxygen, 92, and I think uranium. These are what define the elements that make up the world, that make up us. So the clock of the Bible grabs a hold, the top of the Bible, grabs a hold, the first goes mine, when the matter comes into being, and the first stable matter is protons. Okay? Now this is just talks about, you actually cut it. This is the idea of the 2 weeks and the 1 week. Okay, I'm so sorry I don't have a whole diagram here, which tells you all that NASA says about it. But it's a time diagram. You'll notice that the universe is expanding from the creation point. And if with the galaxy experiment, with exploding stars, I measured that it was a factor of 2. I took the ratio. And to go back, I had to divide by a factor of 2. If I knew for the expanding universe, I live out here, we live out here, at this line where B is. This alpha is us out here, because this is today. But if I knew how much space had stretched from matter, point A, to point B, I could tell what going back in time, what the 14 billion years would look like for the perception of the Bible. Or alternatively, I could say, well, the Bible tells you this number of days. How would it expand to us here? Either way, it's all pure science. None of these are Bible numbers. None of these are Schroeder numbers. I was just a lucky guy that stumbled onto that knew enough Bible and Torah to put them together. But there's not a Schroeder number on this board. It's all science. I want to get that ratio. Now the ratio comes out to be 900 billion. We're going to get to the actual calculation at the end. If I put on the whole calculation, you'd all be asleep. It has a bit of physical calculus. It's not very complicated, but at the very end I can show it, and anyone can go to my website. That is, the universe has stretched nominally, and I want to make it clear, the actual calculation we'll see later, by 900 billion, which is interesting, it's all billions. 14 billion years, it could have been any number, but that's the ratio. Notice there are no units in it. It's not 900 billion seconds, minutes, hours. It's just a fraction of how much bigger B is than A. Which means if I had 900 billion seconds of history as I measure time, the Torah would measure it as 1 second. If you had 900 billion hours of time, the Torah would see it as 1 hour. I don't know what it would be, the caveman, who knows what it would be. 900 billion days would see 1 day. That's all science. There's no Schroeder in this. There's no Bible in it. It's just pure and simple. I'm just a guy that put the numbers together. We have 14 billion years. But it's that 900 billion is that ratio that we talked about a second ago, that A to B. So I have to contract my 14 billion years by 900 billion. And the unit years remains because there's no units on the bottom. And they all cross out, and I have 14 years divided by 900 is 15 thousandths of a year. The entire age of the universe, according to science, from the Bible's perspective, is 15 thousandths of a year. There's no debate about this. People may have arguments about whether it just was by chance it worked or not, but it's 15 thousandths of a year, which is kind of interesting because it is 5.5 days. The simple fact is, the universe is 5.5 days old. Thank you, you're the only one that got it. Yeah. It's amazing. No. It is literally true. That's pure science up there. There's no Bible in that. From the Bible's point of view, it is 5.5 days. The Bible doesn't see time as we see time. We don't live in the biblical perspective. But like we can use the data to make your iPhone work, because we know about tunneling and action at a distance and all things that don't make any sense to how we see the world, we can make an iPhone. The same thing is true for two perspectives of time. They are both literally true. The universe is 5.5 days, but you have to define your terms. As the Torah sees time, and it is Yom Echad, day one. The universe is 14 billion years old, as we measure time. But that's not biblical time. That's our time. The Torah does not see time in those 6 days of Genesis as we see time. The Torah sees time from the Bible's perspective, which is no people, it's completely not human, day one. I didn't figure it out. You know, the text was there many years even before Nachmani. The fact is, they are both literally correct. And that solves any problem that you have with age of the universe. So, and we see in Psalm there's an example of this, of two different times. 1,000 years in our eyes are like a day yesterday, you know, in God's time. And you know, it's just a figurative statement. But we show that the Hillel have been talking about this for quite a while. So this is just a summary of the events. But I urge you, if you have time, anytime you go to Google, type in NASA, and then go to WMAP. I'm so sorry I cut out the diagram, which has all the data that NASA writes on it. I have to. So here, the Torah starts looking at time from a human perspective. We see that because from Adam forward, it's totally human-based time. Adam and Eve live 130 years. Have a kid named Seth. Seth lives 105 years. A kid named Enoch. They're not having kids out in outer space. They have anyone on Earth. So there's two calendars, and Chazal had it because they split the calendar at Rosh Hashanah. That's exactly why there are two calendars. Because there are two calendars. And they're both literally correct. Remember, the Big Bang is the festivus for God, since Moses came down Sinai. It tells us there's a creation. It doesn't tell you how the creation took place. We have a whole video called Proof of God in 5 minutes, which in 5 minutes and 28 seconds discusses the nature of the creation from a science point of view, which matches exactly the nature of creation from the Torah point of view. That's why we have 4 million views on it, not because it's nourished kind. I don't know. So there's two perspectives and one reality. Us looking back, I repeat myself 15 times because the diagram is vastly more, I don't know if I can read you from here, it's vastly more impressive than just seeing it without the words on it, because the NASA diagram, as it comes down, this is that diagram there. Well, that's with my ages shown on the duration of each day there, but the actual diagram, this is NASA, right? This piece of paper is 10 years old. Hasn't changed one bit on the NASA. All these words are NASA words. There's no Bible on this at all. It just talks exactly. So if you do go to it, I really urge you. I think it's the most important theological statement that science is ever going to make. And it's just, you get it from the WMAP, which are the initials of the NASA satellite. Which is something interesting also, because you'll notice that the rate of expansion is increasing. That's not a mistake in the drawing. For some bizarre reason, the nature of the world is increasing. And someone asked in the previous lecture, one of the instructors asked in the previous talk that Bennett set up about the idea of an oscillating universe. Maybe there's no creation of the universe to get bigger, smaller, bigger, smaller. There are no data that support that. In fact, the rate of expansion shows that the universe its rate is increasing. Just one little nuance: if it had taken not 14 billion of our Earth years, but let's say 60 or 70 billion to get to the point of light beams becoming alive, because that's what happened. Light beams became alive. We would have no understanding of the Torah whatsoever. As my great colleague and friend Arnie Novak said, we live in a special time. Because if instead of it taking 14 billion of our years to get here, it had taken about 60 or 70 billion years, the universe would be so large, and Earth's rate is expanding, that we would not be able to see any other galaxy. We would only be able to see the Milky Way. And we would say, but the Bible says, it's the same Bible, but the Bible says 6 days. How can this possibly be? The only can make the calculation that 5.5 days is literally true is because we can see other galaxies. But in a few more tens of billions of years, if there's still a world, Mashiach, etc., that can come. There'll be no understanding of this. We live in a special time as far as science goes, because for the first time we are literally understanding that there's a metaphysical aspect in the world. That we have, that is not the physical world. Torah's always said that, so not a big deal for Torah. But for science to come and say there's aspects of this world that are not of this world. That's right, we're of this world with the aspect. It's such a totally special time. Now we can, okay, see if we're going to have questions and answers. Should I do that? There's one other thing with the Torah. Sometimes people ask about dinosaurs. Get it that or skip it? Skip it?
Skip anything.
What? Well,
Dinosaurs, yes.
Yeah, okay, dinosaurs, then we get questions. Okay, this is it, I think. Oh, this is the calculation. You can take a picture, go to my website, and I didn't know how to make it in computer language, so there it is. That's the calculation that leads to this understanding of the two. And it's a simple integral equation. It's not very complicated. Just look. If you haven't taken simple math, it looks complicated, but it's very straightforward. But it's totally. There is no Bible on that page, except the Bible at the top says 6 days, and science says 14 billion years. There's no Bible on that. It's just total science. I mean, it can't be by chance. Like the moth can't be the same as the other. It's just okay. Dinosaurs. Just really quickly, dinosaurs. I give myself less than 2 minutes on dinosaurs. So Ben keeps asking me, why doesn't the Bible talk about dinosaurs? I mean, first look at the Bible and break. There's 26 sentences from the creation of the universe to Adam. You know, there's almost nothing in there. The Hayden Library at MIT, where I did my work, we have 50,000 books, not on the theology, physics, chemistry. Up to Harvard, they had 200,000 books. We get 26 sentences. So give it a break, okay? Cut a little slack. But of course, dinosaurs are mentioned in the Bible. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 21, we read something called the Taninim Gedolim. Now, if I take any, and as we did, Ben and I did before, in fact, there's one right there. If you look at the translation of Taninim Gedolim, first of all, Gedol means what? Big. So it's the only anything in Genesis chapter 1 that gets a size descriptor. It's the big Taninim. The question is, what's Taninim? The King James translation is whales. This translation here is saying there's a big sea giant. I've even seen dragons. The big dragon. I mean, it's just all over the map. So, but the irony is, we know what Taninim means. The singular of Taninim is Tanim. And Tanim, we know what it means. How do we know? Not from a dictionary. We know by looking in the Bible. So Moses at the burning bush. Well, God says back to Egypt. Moses says, nothing doing, don't kill me. God says, I'll give you a trick. Throw the stick on the ground. He throws the shepherd's stick on the ground, and it